can't be green if I go out of business because I'm operating assets that have a higher cost than they do a return. There's a lot of different ways to make hydrogen, but the most common way is through electrolysis, a process that requires tremendous amounts of electricity. Sometimes the most passionate green people are drinking the Kool-Aid. My 3-day trip I took with one of our drivers, I wore a t-shirt that said trucker, went with him everywhere he went, slept in the cab, ate where he ate, didn't shower for 3 days. It was a great experience.
For those listening, I've got Matt McLelland with us today, VP of Sustainability, Covenant Transport.
And Innovation. Sustainability and Innovation. It's a combo title.
Man, I should have written that on my arm or something to remind myself. I knew I was going to mess that up. But thanks for coming on, chatting with me. I'm pretty excited to talk about, dive in the weeds of especially the sustainability and the tech part and the innovation and trucks. I was looking up some stuff earlier. I've got some questions to pick about.
Well, we had dinner last night and sort of talked through kind of what types of things we could talk about, and after about 2 hours, it's all right, we're all over the place, and we've talked about a lot of things that we could go on about forever. So it's funny that we've only spent a little bit of time together over the years, but we have a lot in common. The
outdoors for sure,
including a beautiful wife and a beautiful lady friend of yours. So,
that's right. Yep.
We both enjoy the crazy things that you and I enjoy.
Yeah, that's cool. Cause you always got back from the Tetons, right?
We did. We went to a wedding last weekend. So we spend, I spend at least collectively maybe a month a year out there just climbing and skiing and doing a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about today. Right? I mean, between the sustainability and logistics and semi-trucks and stuff, I can kind of nerd out there because I want to get your thoughts on battery-powered, hydrogen-powered, automated driving, that sort of stuff, aerodynamics and then, of course, outdoors, and then adventures. Then you got the whole van part, too, where you do a lot of travel in the van. And
we'll have part 2 and 3 maybe at some point, although there's a lot more people interesting than me in Chattanooga for you to talk to. So, that's great. I look forward to it.
Man, well, thanks for going on chatting. All right, so diving into the truck part, how did you get into this?
So Covenant Logistics is a publicly traded logistics company. I get in trouble sometimes on podcasts because I say we're a trucking company, but we're actually full services. We have warehousing, freight brokerage. We're sort of this turnkey solution. But most of our heritage is in trucking, so that's where we came from. So we have about 2,500 trucks. And most large trucking companies like us, you have a truck-to-trailer ratio of 3 to 1, 4 to 1. So we have 2,500 trucks, about 8,000 trailers, and diesel trucks going down the road. We're long-haul transportation, so we don't really do regional work. We go cross-country, so our trucks are all sleeper cabs. Maybe at some point I'll tell you about my 3-day trip I took with one of our drivers where I wore a t-shirt that said trucker and went with him everywhere he went, slept in the cab, ate where he ate, didn't shower for 3 days. It was a great experience. But so I've been there about 7 years, and it's a great role. I really enjoy it.
So what led you into this? I mean, did you have you just curious and started learning about this, or what sort of
it's funny. I came to Covenant right before COVID in 2018, and the role was something very different, and I could go on a rabbit trail as to what it started out being. It was an innovation role, and it had to do a lot with what I was doing in my prior role at Kenco Logistics, which is also an industry-related player that's based here in Chattanooga, very large. They're privately held. Covenant's publicly traded. And it really wasn't even a full-time job initially. It was a part-time job, which was something that I had intentionally looked for at that particular stage in my life. Our son was young, and we were trying to sort of balance some things, and my wife is fully employed, and so I went to Covenant in this role, which evolved into a full-time role. But, Sam, it's interesting because after about 2 years, all of a sudden, customers started asking us, it used to be, can you get my stuff here on time? Can you get it here safely? Can you get it here cheaply? That's really all people cared about. Yeah. And then around 2020, customers started asking, what about autonomous vehicles? And what about green freight? And what about sustainability? And what about battery electric this or hydrogen that? And they had a lot of questions about it. And really nobody in the company knew anything about it, right? But you need to make sure you have answers to these questions. They're like, well, that's closest to what Matt does. Let Matt look into it. So pretty quickly, I sort of became the expert in everything that was going on in our industry related to alternative fuels and technology and innovation, specifically related to the truck. And it was interesting, Sam, because I would go on these sales calls, and these are to big customers like Target and Starbucks and brands that you and I, interact with every day. And they would want to know about, safety, and our safety person would talk. And then they would want to know about operations, and the operations person would talk. And then they carved out maybe 5 minutes on sustainability. And I would start talking. And then they would start asking questions. And 5 minutes, Sam, would turn into 10 minutes. And then they would, our salesperson would start looking at his watch and say, okay, we need to go on. And the customer would say, no, I want to keep talking about this. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and all of a sudden these became larger conversations. And anyway, I could sort of go on and tell you sort of lots of stories about how that would always go. But ultimately, sustainability and green delivery of freight, or the potential for green delivery of freight, has become a part of the way people at Covenant, but also in our industry, have to do business today.
I mean, it's almost like another feather in their cap, if you will, when it comes to what they can market, right? So if they can say that their products are being delivered in a green way, I mean, not just you all as a company, but then the people you're delivering to. I maybe it was you or someone else I was talking to industry, but talking to, how you can basically pitch this as like you're going to have X amount of products delivered with this amount of, renewable energy or something like that. And that could become something that's probably used within their own company, Yeah,
it's funny. There are, so in the sustainability world, there's what's called greenwashing, right? Which is sort of painting a picture that you're doing a lot, but you're doing it maybe for the wrong reasons, right? It's not really authentic. It's just about the marketing. It's about being able to tell your customers, like if you're a Walmart, like we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. And, for Walmart, it's actually legitimate, authentic. Their leadership believes it from the top down. But there are other customers or companies that may have those initiatives because it pitches well.
Yeah.
And I've come across a lot of people that fall into both buckets. Fortunately, most people authentically, right? If you exist on Earth and you drive in a busy city and you deal with air quality and trees or lack of trees, this is something that we can all agree on. But some customers are willing to spend a lot more in order to kind of get there. Other ones just want to talk about it. Others want to do just enough to check boxes to suggest to the world that they're sort of thoughtful in doing these types of things. And so, it's all across the spectrum.
But it's a major role in the business, though, because you were talking last night about like you're writing your annual reports, your publicly traded company, and you have a part of that you have to contribute to, right?
It's called a corporate social responsibility report. Some companies call them ESG reports, right? Environmental social governance, and those are it's basically people, planet, and community. How do we treat our people? What are we doing to benefit the planet, and what are we doing in the communities where we live and work? And so, an ESG report is a little bit more specific. It has data that you collect on your emissions and things that there's all kinds of different standards and things that you can sort of report on. And, and you were to publish those in your report, but a sort of lesser version of that is a CSR report. And it basically is just a philosophical approach to what you're doing in each of those areas. You highlight specific projects and initiatives that you're working on, and that's what I produce every year. That's what Covenant produces every year.
Yeah, and the part that fascinates me is of course there's like, I guess from my side I see a lot of companies, and you got to work with companies over the years. I've seen some of the especially larger ones where it gets a little political. Not going to dive into politics, but it gets a little political on basically they're using it as their own marketing scheme, right? Like it makes them sound cool, like one thing you just said. But on you guys' side as a company, like not only is it good for the environment to be sustainable, but then you have a whole equation side where it can cost or save you money, right?
Yeah,
so you're testing that all the time.
I mean, I'm that's very astute. I'm glad you brought that up because it's interesting because I can assure you that sustainability is never inexpensive. It's never cheap, and it's never the same price as the diesel assets that we're operating today. It's always going to be more, no matter what. And I have gotten into debates with people about, no, this technology, it'll pay for itself over time. And, it would be interesting if anybody's listening that's sort of in this world. Feel free to look me up. I'd love to sort of debate you on it, not because I want to be right, but because it's just the world that we live in, and trying to convince our customers that, if you want an electric vehicle, you've got range limitations. You can't carry as much in the trailer because the tractor weighs more, and you've got a weight limit on what you can carry on the road. The truck itself is more expensive. The charging is limited. You add all those things up, and you've got freight delivery that's 3 to 4 times the price of a regular diesel truck. So then you have to sort of balance your priorities. Do I want to do electric delivery of freight in an electric vehicle and sort of meet sustainability goals, but am I willing to pay this? And so it's always sort of a balance. For us, it's a combination of genuine, authentic altruism, right? We want to do the right thing. We know that we drive diesel trucks. We know that we contribute to, when we talk about carbon a lot, but there's emissions and particulate matter and soot and all kinds of other things that come out the tailpipe other than carbon. So I like to remind people that it's not just about CO2. There's a lot of other reasons to want to deliver cleaner and greener. There's also a regulatory component to it, specifically in California, where there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, and I could talk forever about what those are like because it's very frustrating. And maybe at some point I'll give you one example of like the most frustrating thing that California sort of wants companies like us to do. And then there's of course what the customer wants and what they're willing to pay for, most importantly. So our ability as a public company to set goals related to the environment is directly proportional to what customers are willing to pay for, balanced with what the government is requiring us to do, because I can't be green if I go out of business because I'm operating assets that have a higher cost than they do a return. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And and when I say this next statement, it's going to make me sound like someone who doesn't care about the environment. And I really do, because I, like you and I have in common, love the outdoors. I want nature to be protected. I mean, it's where I feel the most alive and sync.
Amen.
With whatever we live in, world, the spiritual realm, whatever you want to call it. But there's also, I think, a lot of people that really push, like, for instance, California, and a lot of people that are really, and I'm just generalizing here, big on the green side. I think maybe they might forget that it really affects not just you all as a company or your clients like a Starbucks, but eventually that price gets passed on to the consumer. And so it's like how much more, and especially when you consider like Walmart and these sort of companies that might be selling to the lower bracket income individuals, like how much more can they afford? We're already tied elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So there's like this balancing act of, of course, I imagine you all want to win bids with clients, so you can't have super high prices, but then Target and all them, they don't necessarily want to raise their prices more. And there's got to be a balancing act, reasonability.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then there's also, and this is an area where I can get a little bit sort of cynical, but, I run across a lot of people, sometimes the most passionate green people that just are drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Like they are full on global warming, and just for the listener, I'm not throwing global warming on the bus or any of that. We're not going to go there, but there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about these things without thinking that the apocalyptic side of climate change is the reason why we're doing all this. So there are a lot of reasons, that we all need to be sort of on the bandwagon. I don't feel like the left or the right owns that topic. I think if you go outside and you enjoy the outdoors, let's don't mess this up, right? And it really has less to do with, is it 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius? But where I'm going with this is that, a lot of times you look at a hydrogen truck, right? It's probably one of the cleanest forms of transportation possible. Well, in order to get the hydrogen, you have to make it, right? And there's a lot of different ways to make hydrogen, but the most common way is through electrolysis, which is a process that requires tremendous amounts of electricity to extract hydrogen from water. So then the question, so you make all this hydrogen, you put it in a truck, like, okay, well, how much electricity did it take to do that? And how was that electricity generated? Did it come from a coal plant? Right. Did it come from a natural gas plant? Because if you basically consumed a lot of energy from a not clean source to create a fuel to push this truck down the road, what did you really accomplish? So it's what's called, there's called tank to wheel and well to wheel, which is kind of a way to look at sort of the total sort of picture of where the change that you're trying to implement is coming from. And a lot of times, a lot of things we think are green are not really all that green at all. And that's before you even get into how did that truck get here and where did the battery components come from, and did it come from a country in another part of the world where they don't adhere to the same types of labor standards that we do here in the U.S. And, it just becomes really muddy really quickly.
Yeah. So it's easy for me I love naturally aspirated, turbocharged, supercharged motors, like two-stroke dirt bikes. I love the sound of them, the feel. Combustion engine is one of my favorites.
Nothing like a two-stroke dirt bike.
Oh, it's
and the smell.
Yeah. It's, but There's also some really, really awesome elements to electric, like the instant torque. And it could be amazing if we could ever figure it out. But you think about California, they already have electrical supply issues as it is. Blackouts and stuff like that already happening in the middle of summer. Like, how in the world they're trying to push to all electric by? I think that initiative just got turned back, didn't
It did. So we'll dive into the political side of this just for a second, right? But I won't cast judgment anywhere. But California's had a lot, especially in the previous administration, movement towards electrification. Well, this is in a state, as you pointed out, that has rolling blackouts, that doesn't have enough power to provide for their existing needs, right? Much less the growth curve that they want and expect and are regulating up until what you just referred to, which we'll come back to in a second. It doesn't even account for the type of growth that comes from the electrification that they wanted to come out of that. Plus, you add on data centers, AI, and we all know that those types of resources are consuming massive amounts of electricity. So we're being pushed to use a resource. I'll give you an example. Right now, we have a warehouse in a part of California called the Inland Empire. It's near the LA area. It's this big giant circle, and we have operated a warehouse on behalf of a very large publicly traded company. And during the month of January, 15, 16 days throughout the month, we had, we were without power. We had to have generators brought in. At that facility, we are trying to implement electrification of forklifts and these yard tractors, which are devices that are run on diesel today that move things around the yard. Well, we can't get permits to build the charging station because there's not enough electricity in that part of the county to light these things up. There's not enough capacity. So, we have the trucks. The customer's already paid for those. And we have the desire. We also have the law that's telling us that we need to do it.
Wow.
But I can't get the charging stations. I've got competitor friends at other large public trucking companies, some much larger than us, that are sitting on $300,000-$400,000 electric trucks just sitting in a corner of a lot because they can't get charging allocated, for the areas where they need to be installed. And so it's really sort of crazy. And then, the current administration just rolled back some of the more sort of aggressive plans that they wanted. Like, there was, I think California can still do this. They're trying to still mandate all cars after 2035 have to be zero emission, which technology just isn't there yet, so that's not going to happen. But some of the rules that they were using to force fleets like ours to decarbonize, to move over to some of these alternative fuel sources, they rolled those back. Like, they're just not making them regulated anymore.
I mean, it's what are our next options because wind is basically a loss. From what I understand, the only way that wind ever really made sense, was basically propped up by stimulus. It's propped up by the government offsetting their expenses, and then by the time they do get to a point where they're maybe producing to where it become a net positive, you have to replace them. And then what do you do with the giant, huge? I mean, those
they chop them up and they bury them.
Yeah.
Well, so that's interesting. Let me talk about that for a second, because I hope when you put this podcast together, there'll be like those little links at the bottom, and you okay, we'll skip past the rest of this electric stuff and get to the outdoor stuff.
We need to. That's a good idea. I like that.
So some of the podcasts I listen to, they're sort of segmented like that.
Right.
No, but it's a great point because being in the innovation space, I've read a lot and spent a lot of time looking at this. But Sam, some of the greatest innovations in our country have been the result of government investment, government propping things up. I mean, I think we've seen that. Aviation, a lot of really positive things on the consumer side of things have come from the investment they've made in space. So I think the government has played a really great role in kickstarting a lot of things that you and I enjoy today, right? I am not anti-regulation or anti-EPA, but I am against cumbersome and unnecessary regulation, especially when you look at the way we do things here compared to other countries. And so, I think that a lot of the, investment that the government has in order to prop up windmills or am I saying windmills? You got me caught on that now.
Sorry.
My wife is Dutch, and so I always think of
Yeah.
windmills. But just all of the wind generation in the country. I mean, a lot of that is only possible because it's being propped up. Some of the the IRA, the IRA bill from last year, which partially got rolled back, had allocated $5 billion towards a public charging infrastructure infusement, and we have yet to see any of that. Any public charging stations created as a result of that. So I think there is a place for government investment and propping it up, and we do have some technologies that can only exist. I mean, electrification of cars in the beginning, especially when you think about Tesla and some of these other, there were these $7,500 and $10,000 tax credits, which were really the only way those things could be made possible. Even in my industry, some of the early adopters in trucking essentially got the trucks paid for through a combination of grants at the state and federal level, where the truck was $400,000, but they ended up only having to pay like $50,000 or $60,000 out of pocket after all these grants kind of kicked in. And that's really the only way a lot of this stuff works right now.
You do have some like small steps though. You're telling me about a cool device that like attaches to the actual exhaust pipe on these, and it produces. You explain it better than I do. But there's a bunch of cool products that you all are testing, experimenting with to kind of like help you ease into this electrical part potentially whenever the technology catches up. Like imagine aerodynamics is one of them. Which quick side story, and I want to hear your answer. Not that I know anything about this really, but a little bit of bike racing I did back in the day. We got into time.
You mean back in the day? You're still bike racing?
Well, motorcycle racing now, bicycle racing.
Okay, that's right.
But on road bikes, aerodynamics is a big part, but especially on time trials. And I was one day going from one race to another, and this is probably back in like 2006, something like that. So I don't think they'd really adopted all the disc wheels and the fairings on the trailers yet. Maybe some early adopters, but I had yet to see one. And I was on the road a lot for racing. I was like, why don't they make dimpled wheels? Because I've got this carbon fiber dimpled rear wheel. It's like the golf ball aerodynamics, and skinny tubes of fairings. And, we're doing like wind tunnel testing, that sort of thing. And then it wasn't a few years later, I started seeing disc wheels on the tractor trailers and fairings. And
somebody was over listening to your conversation.
Right. But it seems like they're making small steps like that probably not only save the company money, but it reduces fuel costs, reduces the consumption of oil. I mean,
all that is true. But at the end of the day, a big rig truck gets, depends on what you're pulling. I mean, there's a lot of variables, but let's just say 7 to 8 miles a gallon. And you can spend a bunch of money on fairings and wheel covers and all kinds of other things, and maybe you get 8.5 mpg. Well, that's a big deal, right? Like over the course of a vehicle that goes 200,000 miles a year. One investment that we made years ago, and I actually really pushed it hard internally in our company, was we installed these devices called electric auxiliary power units. And what they were these battery banks and an air conditioning and heating system that would be inside the truck, because our trucks are sleeper cabs. Our drivers live in the trucks while they're on the road. And so you ever been to a truck stop, and at night, and you have 100 trucks idling, right? And the reason they're idling is because the driver's sleeping inside, and that's, they got the air conditioner running or the heater running, and they got their CPAP machine plugged into the electrical outlet, which is running off the inverter that's kind of running off the truck. Well, what this electric APU does is it charges up this extra bank of batteries during the day using an upgraded alternator. And so when it comes time for the driver to go into what's called its rest cycle, they can only drive for a certain number of hours a day. They pull in the truck stop, park it, turn off the engine, and then, for the next 10 hours, the HVAC, everything runs off this battery bank. And so you save about 9/10 of a gallon of diesel per hour when you're not idling the truck. And over the course of the year, that ends up being a lot of fuel savings. But ultimately, does it outweigh the investment that you made in that asset? So, you always have to look at things that you're investing in, and what the payback is. But I think probably the bigger thing, and this is what I run into a lot, Sam, especially with customers, is that those are all trinkets, right? Like, okay, you saved a gallon per hour, big deal. You went from 7 to 8, maybe 9 mpg, big deal. Like, I want zero emission. Like, that's what I'm looking for. Like, I'm not looking for Band-Aids. I'm looking for full-on, changing this. Well, those solutions are very difficult to find. There's a handful of them out there. They're expensive. They all have, drawbacks. We've talked about hydrogen. Like hydrogen's great, but where's the fuel that you're getting? We're testing a 100% biodiesel truck, where that's almost a near zero emission event, but there's sort of downsides to that as well. So in the world that I live in, there's what's called science experiments, which comes back to the question that you just asked. I look at a lot of things that are not quite ready for market, but they're looking for partners and looking for advice and looking for people to test these things to see if they actually pan out. So the product that you're talking about is a company called Remora. So it's a pre-revenue company. What they've done is they've made this big giant device that bolts onto the back of the truck. I'm just going to sort of gloss over things here, but
Sure.
It bolts onto the back of the truck. It weighs 6,000 pounds. It's really expensive.
I didn't know it was that heavy.
Oh, yeah.
I was imagining something smaller than this.
Oh, no. It's really big.
Wow.
And it bolts onto the back, and it clamps onto the exhaust pipe, and all the exhaust that comes out of the truck runs through the system. So their system in real time converts all the CO2, or not all the CO2, but about 93, 94% of the CO2 into liquefied CO2, stores it in a tank. So what's coming out of the tailpipe, no CO2. And very little particulate matter, very little soot, very little NOx. So what's coming out of the tailpipe, I wouldn't, breathe it, but it's a lot safer than what was coming out before. But the important thing is the carbon, right? The carbon is almost completely removed. Stores it in a tank, and then when they go to refuel, the idea is that there'll be offloading tanks, and you can, kind of take it out of the truck, and the truck goes back on the road. Well, eventually these larger tanks get filled. And then part of the revenue model is you sell this liquefied CO2 to concrete and steel manufacturers because it's a raw material in the creation of those products. So here you have direct carbon capture on a truck that's basically turning a diesel asset into a zero emission vehicle, right? That's great, but it's expensive, it weighs a lot, and whatever weight that you add to the truck is cargo that you have to remove from the trailer because you can only have 80,000 pounds on the road. So it's kind of like everything in life, right? There's a lot of benefits, but there's some drawbacks too.
Do you know what that cost is on that? Any idea?
Yeah, early stage, it's about $150,000, but the company is actually sort of in parallel with trucking. They're developing one of these that goes on a rail car, right, for a diesel locomotive, and that's actually going to be a more practical application for them initially because with rail cars you don't have to worry about weight because they don't really have the same kind of weight restrictions that you do in the U.S. Plus, you can add these giant tanks or just add another car with a giant tank on it so you can have carbon collection all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast without having to unload it because that's also, that kind of slows you down a little bit. So,
Right.
So I look at a lot of interesting things like that. And it's super exciting. Investment, startups, capitalism, what makes young guys like yourself, want to kind of risk everything and try this new technology and sort of work 100 hours a week and try to invent the next big thing. Like that's where the next big answer is going to come from. I don't think it's going to come from the big original equipment manufacturers. I think it's going to come from somebody's garage, from the result of some academic program. It's super exciting to be a part of the startup community and watch the ideas that are coming out of I hate to say youth, but they all tend to be younger.
Right.
Most people are younger than me at this point, I guess. So.
I guess there is a risk associated, right? Because to develop that product, to get it to market, to launch it, it kind of does lend itself to someone younger who has the time to fail and fail and fail again until something takes, or a big company doing the R&D. But
sometimes what I come across is, you'll have like a really smart kid in college and they sort of have this idea like, I want to invent an autonomous drone, right? And they don't really think about the application for it, but they just kind of want to do this. I actually met a kid that did this, a couple years ago. But then he starts thinking, well, how can I monetize this thing? Because, I've got to figure out a way to put a business model around like, I can do inventory scanning in a warehouse after hours where these things can fly around and just sort of scan and do things. And so, I remember this one particular kid came to me and he said, "This is a problem for your industry." I'm like, "What makes you say that?" He's like, "Well, it just seems like it would be." Like, well, actually, we have pretty accurate inventory counting, but yes, there is probably a place for this, but it's probably not as big of an addressable market as you think it is. So it's what we call solutions in search of a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Is there one solution in your years of doing this that really stands out as like a big breakthrough, or one you're excited that hasn't come out yet?
You know, I think that so in the innovation space, right? And I wish, and I guess a lot of your listeners are probably just doing this over podcasts. So if I had a piece of paper, I'd draw this out. But on one hand, you have continuous improvement, right? The expectation that a company's always going to get a little bit better, right? Starbucks is going to come up with a more yummy cup of coffee, or Taco Bell is going to come up with the next variation of a burrito that's better than the one that we just kind of expect that kind of stuff is going to happen.
Right.
Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, you have full-on disruption, which is the complete change the way that a market works. So examples of that are, I know this is very trendy, people use it a lot, but Uber and Lyft disrupted the taxi industry by completely coming up with another model, right? Airbnb completely disrupted the hotel and hospitality business by allowing people like yourself to get into renting extra rooms in their house. You know, you could argue that like Apple iTunes completely disrupted the way we consume music.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, nobody buys CDs anymore. We all stream it. So those are disruptions. And in the middle, you have what's called, sort of innovation, right? That's kind of between continuous improvement but it's not quite disruption. So it's like the continuing evolution on a scale of 1 to 10. We expect this coffee to get better. But innovation is like continuous improvement on steroids, and then you have full-on disruption. And so if your question is what's happening on the disruptive side, in trucking, I don't really know. I don't think there is anything truly disruptive coming. In energy production, there's small-scale nuclear. That's something that Bill Gates and his breakthrough energy are sort of investing a lot in. There is no flux capacitor out there on the horizon, which is interesting because, we have this massive need for energy in this country and the world. And, nuclear is probably the thing that is the cleanest with the most potential for scale. But a lot of people don't like nuclear. But is the best thing that we have going out there. So it's easy to make fun of a lot of things that we make fun of, but we forget that we are consumers that demand more and more and more of this energy source of electricity. And so we need to be a little bit more careful than Gavin Newsom was when he tried to shut down the Diablo nuclear power plant down in San Diego years ago. Finally, cooler heads prevailed. They're like, where are we going to get all this energy that's no longer going to be available to this plant that we're going to mothball? They realized they couldn't do it, so they invest in what it took to keep that thing running, and that thing's still running today.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand it, nuclear is one of the cleanest sources of energy we have, right? Because
hydro and wind are great, but those are not without their sort of downsides. Here in Chattanooga, hopefully your listeners are not just based in Chattanooga, but for those of you that are, we all know about the Raccoon Mountain Pump Station, which is a brilliant idea of a way. It's like a giant water battery, right? Or it's a giant energy batteries that, during the evening when, you have excess energy in the system because people are sleeping and the lights are off and they're not, running all the stuff. You take that electricity, you run that giant pump that pulls water out of the Tennessee River, fills the lake on top of Raccoon Mountain. You know about this, right?
Yeah.
And then once it's filled, everybody starts to wake up and they sort of cap it off and people start their day. And as energy requirements start increasing, if there's an energy shortage, then they can just, empty the lake, reverse process through the hydroelectric component that is the pump that filled it in the first place.
Yeah.
And you can, generate energy. In fact, I think TVA is investing in a second one of those facilities. That thing was built in like the 60s or the 70s.
It's pretty wild. You go up there and you see that reservoir.
I've been in it.
Oh, really? I
Oh,
want to go in there.
fascinating.
I'm convinced there's missile silos under it. You don't have to tell me. I know you probably can't tell me.
I have been in there. There are not missile silos, but man,
Sure,
I tell you, the
it looks like
technology that's in there is just amazing. And it's not new. It's not rocket science.
Right.
But yeah, there really isn't anything disruptive on the horizon. I wish there was, but there isn't. So it's always you always got to be careful to be, not you, but people be too critical when they start wanting to throw some of the things that we do today under the bus. It's like sausage. The example, like people want to eat sausage, they don't want to know how it's made. Well,
Right.
people want to be critical of energy and the ways we create energy, but they're not really interested in where it comes from.
Right. Right. All right. One random question for you.
Oh, let me say one other thing. We're talking about what people's motivations are behind sustainability. I remember, this is a good transition to the outdoor stuff that you and I both love, but my son and I have summited Grand Teton several times, like 4 times, 3 times with him, 4 times for me. But I remember the second time he and I did it, he was maybe 12 years old, and we'd spent 2 days getting to the summit. So we're on the summit. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm with just some of my best friends. I'm with my son, and we're on the summit, and there's no wind, and the sky is just perfect. And it was really kind of emotional. In fact, I sort of fear a little tearjerker coming up right now as I'm remembering back on this. But when I was standing up there, all I could think of was, I hope this looks just like this one day when he brings his son up here. And the idea is that, that's the whole thing behind sustainability, the ability to meet your needs today without infringing on the next generation's ability to meet theirs.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter about Democrat or Republican or global warming or climate change. Like in that moment, everybody can look at what I looked at and agree that we need to do whatever we can to keep this looking like this. So regardless of the motivation behind the investments and the change that we need as a society, like we can all agree on this. And the why is really kind of irrelevant. Like whether or not I believe in climate change or not is irrelevant, because what I can agree on with somebody that might be on the complete other side of my viewpoint is that we need to protect that. And the investments that we need to make to protect that are exactly the same as the investments we need to make to mitigate climate change or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I love common ground.
Yeah.
The
sausage analogy, no one wants to know where it comes from, sort of thing, is what I always think of when people, especially like with the California we mentioned, we want to go full electric. It's like, okay, well, where does that typically come from? It's coal power, and we look at
still a lot of coal.
Yeah, a lot of coal, and that's one of the most horrendous for our environment. If we across all energies that I know of, at least, better than I would. And then of course, the harder we are, as far as countries go, we're one of the cleaner countries in the world, right?
Yeah, it's funny when you look at, China and India are spinning up coal plants every day.
Yeah.
Like every day. I've got this graphic that I found from earlier this year that showed the number of, what a lot of people don't understand is when Trump, in his first term, when he pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord, it wasn't because he was against the environment. It was because his problem was, well, if China and India are not signing on to this, then what's the point? Because, those are 2 of the worst offenders. And if they're not going to do it, then we could all spend tons of money meeting the initiatives that we all sort of agree we need to make. But in the end of the day, it's not going to matter. Sam, it's interesting. I'm a little bit of a space nerd. I love SpaceX, what Elon Musk has done with SpaceX. It's a whole nother sort of thing. If you haven't read a book on what they've done, it's and how they've been able to accomplish what they've accomplished, it's really amazing. But there's this thing called the observer effect, right? So when astronauts, and I've read about it, read a lot of firsthand accounts of this, but when astronauts leave Earth and they're looking back through the window at the planet for the very first time, they're sort of overwhelmed by the fact that, and we've all seen pictures of the Earth, blue ball and a big black background, but until you see it for the first time and you can't see political boundaries, you can't see people, you can't see languages, you can't see any of the things that make us all different culturally, religiously, from a patriotism perspective, like where we're all from. And you realize that we're all in this together. And the Earth doesn't care about the climate initiatives that the United States has or that China has. Right. Like, we got to look at this holistically. And so this observer effect, they return back to the Earth and their perspectives have just changed significantly. And, they look at solving problems from a standpoint that's very different. So, I think that, we got to start doing something soon. But unless it's something that everyone is committed to, including India and China, it just doesn't matter. I'm not saying we should give up. There's some people say, well, we should try no matter what. I'm like, well, sure. Do I want to, make my products twice as expensive as the same stuff that's coming out of China, where people are just going to buy their stuff anyway and not buy mine because I've got all these extra costs associated with these sort of initiatives that make my product more expensive because I'm adhering to all these sort of environmental laws and emission laws and all these types of things. So that's sort of something that I think people forget about when they're, sort of rattling their.
Yeah, to me, it kind of, it's like, are we that arrogant to where like we want America? Now, I want America to be, I want the world to be beautiful, but they don't really want to see the pollution that China, like they want it out of sight, out of mind, right? Like we want to be completely clean, but we want to be able to buy everything from China and India for, like you said, a lower cost while they build power plants everywhere and they got 1.3 billion people in China and using tons of energy, So that stuff always, I don't want to say makes me crack up, but I think there's a lot of those ideas people haven't taken consideration.
And they are, listen, I don't want to throw China completely under a bus. They are making big investments, in doing things cleaner and greener. But, ironically, they make a lot of the solar panel materials that we use here in the United States. So, they're not completely sort of bad actors, but they are spinning up coal plants at a rate. I don't think the United States does that anymore. I think we're, kind of focused on natural gas and LNG and nuclear and some other types of things, but I don't think we're spinning up new coal plants. But these countries are because they have to. They just have to. There's a great book by Bill Gates, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, and he sort of unpacks a lot of this stuff in a way that is very sort of nonpartisan and interesting. But, if you're living in Africa in the middle of nowhere, and you got to feed your family, and you got to cut down trees to make a fire, to cook the food that if you don't eat, you're going to die, then they don't really care about the planet. And it's not really, they're not bad people because they're doing that. But, we have to sort of look at this sort of bigger picture and realize that there's a lot of people that want to do it, but they just can't do it because they don't have another choice, which is why I'm a big fan of innovation and investment and really trying to figure out, like with windmills, those are great, right? Clean energy. Do they kill a lot of birds? Absolutely. Yeah. Should we outlaw building them in places in America where there's not a lot of population? Should we outlaw it because there's some indigenous turtle that, only lives there and we, basically say you can't build here because of that? Like, I don't know. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
Like I like the turtle. We could relocate them. We could just not build. So there's always sort of an upside and a downside.
Yeah, there's like a practicality to it, and it's got to be considered, right? It has to be practical in some sense.
Yeah, I feel like, go back to the sausage thing. Some people just want to stick their head in the sand and they're like, no, green power right now, all the time. And
right.
I remember, you can buy carbon credits and sort of absolve your sins through buying credits. There's, some land trust and sort of philanthropic things where you can, I've always found it odd. You can sell the credits associated with not chopping down trees in this particular area that you might own in a conservation easement. And a company can buy those credits and sort of offset the emissions that they're coming up with. Well, maybe nobody was going to cut those trees down in the first place. There's a reason it was in a conservation easement. So if you weren't going to cut down the trees in the first place and you just sold the right for that company to continue doing what it was doing, then what have you really accomplished?
Yeah, what happened?
There's a lot of, you could say like, well, the money that the land trust, received, they're going to use that to do other great things. And there may be some truth to that, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of shell games that can be played for companies to present themselves as being cleaner than they really are. But A lot of people don't believe in carbon credits, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Outdoors.
Outdoors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. What was your first outdoor activity you really got into? Was it hang gliding?
So we're both sitting here in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Yeah.
We both love it here, right? We live.
The outdoors have kept me here single handedly.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
I looked at other places. Been to Oregon, I looked at, and I really liked Durango, Colorado. Back when I was cycling a lot, both those places were awesome for mountain biking. But Chattanooga was kind of, especially back then, was kind of untapped. Like it was. I think at that time, that was when Bob Corker was mayor, and he was trying to make us the Boulder of the East, and Boulder of the South, and it definitely started getting momentum. And then Outside Magazine covered us and made us 2 years in a row top outdoor city in the country. And then it started getting, but then when COVID hit, it's been like California, New York, all these other states flooded Chattanooga. So we were talking last night, trailheads are now covered. Like we go to any main trailhead is covered. So it's way different what it used to be back in the day.
I made a bumper sticker that said Boulder, the Chattanooga of the West.
Nice.
Because everybody always said that Chattanooga was the Boulder of the East. Like,
Yeah.
No, Boulder's the Chattanooga of the West. So
Yeah, I like that.
different spin.
But it's changed a lot. But what kept me here was the beautiful outdoor. It's one of the prettiest places I've ever been.
Oh, yeah.
It's
I mean, it's a lifestyle city for my wife and I. So my wife was living in Oregon when we first met, 20 plus years ago. She was in Portland, Oregon, and was skiing on the weekends and, in the winter, and biking and just mountaineering and climbing, Mount Hood. It rained a lot. Apparently there's a lot of suicide in Seattle, Portland, just because it's bad weather and dark and dingy and it's depressing. Which
that's what Chattanooga's become. I don't know how you feel. It's
it's
raining all the
bad.
time.
It's not as bad as it is in Seattle. But when I proposed to her, she wanted to move back, not just because I was here. Her family was here, but Chattanooga's a great place. She wanted to live here. We fly hang gliders and mountain bike and trail run and camp and whitewater paddle up at the Ocoee. There's so many things to do here, and I really am not surprised that we're growing at the rate that we're growing. I mean, there's the income tax free state stuff, and there's a lot of things that are appealing about living in a smaller city, at least what used to be a smaller city. But the outdoor stuff, I was just out in Jackson Hole, and Jackson Hole's beautiful. I can't afford to live there.
Right.
Medical care is scarce. You need a plumber, and there's one guy or two people, and they charge tons and tons of money, and it's just a very hard place, expensive place to live, but it sure is beautiful. But I would, of all the places that I could live that isn't like Telluride or Jackson Hole or Victor,
Right.
Idaho, or some of these Whitefish, Montana, I love it right here.
Yeah.
And you mountain bike, road bike,
Yeah.
motorcycle, obviously.
Yeah. Rock
Although you
climb.
talked about that on your previous podcast with Seth Cathy, which if y'all haven't listened to that, you should, because it's fantastic.
Yes, it was great talking with Seth. Yeah, very, very interesting. Motorcycles for sure is a big part. It's kind of the current thing. Rock climbed a lot too. So
Yep.
started mountain biking and rock climbing right around 11, 12 years old here, and canoeing, kayaking about the same time. But I never got to your level of kayaking. It always scared me being upside down in the water.
The older I get, the less interested I am in that, because there's a lot of consequences that come with fast-moving water.
Did you get into creek boating as well? And
No, I would never do that. And I would also never do, out in Little River Canyon, which is way on the back of Lookout.
Yeah.
I remember there's this guy, Jesse T, was going to take me out there.
I know
You know
Jesse.
Jesse? Yeah. And he was telling me about okay, this next section is called the suicide section. I'm like, I'm not doing anything called the suicide section.
Right.
He's like, well, it's not that bad. There's just this one move that you don't want to miss. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I have a kid, a wife. It's not worth it to me to go down.
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff's, and that's one of the few. Well, there are a handful of sports like this, like probably squirrel shooting, that sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
to me, creek boating in particular is like one sport. The better you get, your probability of dying increases.
Yeah, because you want to
Same
keep
rate.
pushing it and getting harder and harder stuff.
And man, it will, especially in the creeks, because they change so rapidly. For a bunch of years, my buddy and I got into creek running, because the creeks will drop so much here in the summertime. One we did a lot was Bear Creek down in Cloudland Canyon. That's
You're
my favorite
nuts.
one.
There's no way I would do that.
And we
You did that?
So our first, not in a boat. This is on foot.
Oh, yeah, it's okay.
So it's like trail running, and we got to where our first time down Bear Creek, at the time we park up on the road there where it crosses, on what is that, 157 or whatever it is. We parked there and run in. The first time down we took a rope because there's that big waterfall in the middle. And if it's high enough, you can't down climb the main line without a rope. So we'd rappel it on the river left. Long story short, it took us from top to bottom like 6.5, 7 hours.
Wow.
Well, over 3 years' time, we started researching where we wouldn't have to take a rope, and we found a place in this one waterfall in particular. It's about this big around, and it's 25, 30 feet, and we can land in this soft mud spot. And at low water, it'd only be like 4 feet of water, but we land knees bent, smashing in the mud on the bottom, be fine. And we got it down from like 6-7 hours of time down to where we were racing each other down to about, I think our fastest time was like 39 minutes.
Wow. Holy cow.
And we're now jumping all the waterfalls. And a lot of that, if you've been down it, it's just like sidewalk almost in the main part. Not all of it. There's a lot of big boulders too, but you'd have a little bit of water trickling over it and you could just haul ass down it, and run and jump off these little punch bowls. And
there's this fantastic boater here. He actually used to be my kid's teacher at Macaulay, Dave Levitt, and he kayaked Bear Creek regularly, and I was like, dude, you're nuts. But he's also an insanely talented paddler. But it's funny because people think that I'm like, oh, you hang glide, that's dangerous. Like, well, I mean, I think anything you do is dangerous. Driving down here to meet you is dangerous. Sure. I think life is about risk mitigation.
Yeah.
And I would never become a cyclist because I think that the one variable that you can't predict is what the drivers are going to do. With hang gliding or with mountain biking, when you're mountain biking, if you have an accident, that's, unless you had equipment failure, it's, error judgment on your part. Same thing with whitewater paddling. With hang gliding, there's nothing really about that worries me because you can see weather building. So any potential accident that's weather related, it doesn't just happen, it builds. And so you can identify like, well, I don't like what's happening over there. I'm going to come down and land.
Right.
So launching and landing are the two most dangerous parts. And you just I've never been to the site, never been to that landing. Usually, you try to minimize the number of variables when you're flying in a new spot, like new equipment, new site, new people. You want to try to never do all three of those at the same time, Right. So, I've had 25 years of safe flying. I've seen some accidents, but I've never been a part of one. And, I think a lot of that has to do with judgment and days that I didn't fly when other people did. And they turned out being fine, but I'm like, you know what? Maybe I didn't make the right call, but I'm still here.
Yeah. It's funny. It's not funny, but it's interesting you say that. I'd forgotten about this, but, on, I think that's Pope Creek Road.
Yep.
I don't know where it changes, but
yep.
where the hang glider landing area is,
Yep.
they have all the little townhomes on it.
Yep.
I would ride that road frequently on my road bike and go down to Trenton, Georgia, up Lookout. And I was riding one day, and they were coming in to land, and right as I rode by, this guy came in to land, and I was like side by side, and somehow he mistimed it and just decked it straight into the ground. And I found out later it killed him.
Wow.
That was a really bizarre feeling. And it didn't, it didn't seem that bad, but he was coming from, I don't know, probably 50 feet in the air, and he tried to bank one more corner and just completely lost it. I guess too much of whatever the terminology is for that, but just nosed it right into the ground, mistimed it.
Yeah, and in that particular, so in landing fields are rated what's called hang 1, 2, 3, and 4, with 4 being the most complex. Usually they're smaller and there's maybe a lot of trees around them. That field was like a hang 1 field. It's for an accident like that to happen was unnecessary. It didn't need to happen.
Yeah.
With all due respect to whoever it was you saw, to have a landing fatality in that field, it just didn't need to happen. I watched a fatality in that field 23 years ago. I was very new in my flying, and there was a guy doing loops, which hang gliders really aren't rated for that kind of stress. They tell you don't do loops, and this glider broke apart on his second loop. He was, 400 or 500 feet in the air, but he just sort of,
Straight
plowed right into the ground after his glider folded up, and he died. And while it was terrible, it I've never done a loop in a glider because there's a lot of things that you have to be very careful about, even if you've modified your glider to handle that kind of stress. But there's always the potential that the glider is going to break apart, and that's just not worth it to me.
Yeah.
I feel like that about mountain biking. Although, man, I tell you, I do like watching crazy stuff people do on YouTube.
Oh man,
on mountain bikes and motorcycles and
that Red Bull Rampage stuff.
Ooh.
That is, I raced downhill for a little while as a junior, and actually one of the guys that was a couple years older than me, Kyle Strait, he's still doing world-class level stuff. I think he's still doing, I don't know, I think he won one recently. I don't keep up with it a ton, but it's crazy. I mean, the consequences they have throwing backflips off of like 60-foot drops, and it's not even an exaggeration at this point. I'm like, what in the hell are they thinking? That never crossed my mind. Like, and if you ever go see some of this stuff in person, some of the big drops they hit, like, there's no way that wouldn't.
Yep. You know, one thing, this is interesting. I was going to get your opinion on this. I'll tell you, I don't mind saying this. I don't know who's listening to this podcast, but, you know, I'm 55. The older you get, you sort of get a little more, old man, like slow down, you crazy kids. But,
Right.
I actually did that the other day. I went up to get my trash can and somebody was speeding. I'm like, slow down. Like, oh my gosh, I just had an old man moment. But, I've become a little bit of an outdoor snob. Like I'll go, like we were just in Jackson Hole for our wedding, and, my wife and I want to go on a hike, and one of the most attractive places is a place called Jenny Lake, and there's a great hike, but there's so many people there. I'm like, I don't want to go there. I want to be around all those people.
Right.
Even on Lookout, at Sunset Rock, there's just a lot of people there. I tend to not spend any time there. The Little Lake Land Trust, where I'm on the board of directors, great organization. We preserve land and protect it, and try to do a lot to sort of throttle the kind of usage that comes out of our core property. But even then, people criticize us sometimes because we're not open more often. Like, well, we want to try to maintain a smoother level of use of land use, and also crowds and some of that comes with it. But I feel like with this growth that we've experienced here in Chattanooga, the outdoor scene has gotten more crowded. With that has become some vandalism and trash, and just some of the other things that inevitably come with higher use. So I don't want to say, gosh, I wish it was the way it was before anybody liked the outdoors, because I'm glad that people are out there and enjoying it,
Sure,
and appreciating it, and hopefully being inspired to protect it and preserve it. But at the same time, people are people, and they're going to do things they shouldn't. And unfortunately, I've started to witness more trash on the trail. At Sunset Rock, there's some spray painting that's happened recently that really sort of bothered me. So with all the growth that Chattanooga's had, like, what do you think is enough? Like, is that it's probably not fair to say like 700,000 people.
Right.
Let's cap it at that.
Right.
Or I remember when I really started living here, it was like we were at 250.
Yeah.
Right, for the greater Chattanooga area.
Right.
Now we're at double, triple that, right?
Yeah, I can't even keep up with them. I think I forgot county numbers, but city of downtown is like 186, something like that, 200, and then when you count the whole, like, East Brainerd, everything, I think we're getting close to 500 now, maybe over 500.
Yeah, and if Tim Kelly, our mayor, was here, Mayor Chattanooga was here. It's not my mayor; I live in a different zip code, but growth, more people, more companies. Like, growth is good, and there's condos everywhere, and back when 5 years ago you didn't have to have restaurant reservations; you could just show up and get a table, and it's not like that anymore. And you go to Need Loves in the morning, and there's a long line out the door, and I don't know. I mean, it's complicated because the definition of growth is just not what my definition of growth would be.
Yeah, it's I don't. The tough part with melting pots, and that's what we've kind of become, because people from everywhere are coming in, and I like for people, like you mentioned, to enjoy the outdoors. This is something I've always been a little. I felt a little guilty wanting it to myself. It feels like that's just too vain or arrogant for me to think I deserve it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
But what really gets on my nerves is when I'm out on a trail, especially if I'm a mountain bike or dirt bike, and it's an area that hikers are now going to as well, and they have headphones on, and they're with friends and they're not talking, and I'm just going to go out and throw Atlanta under the bus, guaranteed they're from Atlanta, and they made a short trip to Chattanooga, and they want to try hiking, and they give us evil glares or say we shouldn't be on the trails. And that just, man, that, like, for spending, and I guess this is maybe where the vain part comes in. I feel like I've spent so much of my life on the trails helping build them, helping,
Mm-hmm.
like, as a kid, I remember helping build initial mountain bike trails at Lua Lake, and the list goes on. All different trails helped build when Silvey first came to town, But at a certain point, I kind of start getting like a little bit of a chip on my shoulder when it feels like always people are coming here, not really contributing, and then like just flooding all the outdoors. And if they're not appreciating it as well, like people with boom boxes out there, stereos. I know I sound like the old man now too, but it's like if you're going to be out in nature, there needs to be some respect to it.
I know. I was trail running and popped up out of Sunset Rock because it's the easiest way to get back to my house, and there's this guy sitting on the bluff. 50 people out there. He's got his boombox going.
Yeah.
And he's got it going loud and playing music that was, I don't know, far be it from me to call things offensive, but there were words and things that probably weren't, probably for all the people that were there and the kids that were there. But, like how selfish is that? Yeah. But I'll tell you one thing, this kind of restored my faith in humanity about 3 months ago, because I run on the Bluff Trail a lot, which is, for your listeners, below Covenant. It's on Lookout Mountain, below Covenant, kind of below Sunset Rock. A lot of climbers and people are there. And it's a hiking trail. It's not a biking trail. There's no horses. It's a hiking trail. And there's the signage that says that. And so I'm running around this corner. This guy on a mountain bike, almost plows into me. And I've never seen a mountain bike on that trail. And I jumped off the side of the trail when, there's a bluff side, right? It just sort of falls away if you're not in the right place. And the guy just said, "Sorry, man." And he kept riding. And, man, I can't tell you the words that were going on in my head, but I was just pissed. I wanted to find this guy, give him peace of my mind. I was really ticked off. Yeah. And about 10 minutes later, he comes back and says, and he holds up his hand, because I think he expected me to say something. He's like, "Hey, man, I'm really sorry. Like, I just realized that I should not be out here on my mountain bike. I guess I just didn't see the sign. I'm really sorry." And I was like, okay. Like it didn't really make sense. Like he was legitimately, authentically apologetic, and it wasn't going to do anything for me to say, so I said, "Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You're right. And you're doing the right thing." Yeah. I calmed right down.
Yeah. Well, probably good you didn't blow a fuse on the first time.
No, I'm past that. But there's so much to do around here, and I love it. I do feel like Chattanooga's getting a little crowded, a little big. For a business owner like yourself, I'm sure that more growth, more companies, more potential to interact and engage with companies is probably better for you professionally. But man, I just don't want us to turn out like Atlanta or Asheville or some of these other cities that just started well but have ended poorly.
Nashville especially. I feel like Atlanta's always kind of been...
Nashville's a great example.
Nashville really, and especially since COVID, because it became the LA of the East, they all went from, to escape COVID restrictions, came to Nashville, and since then it's blown up. And of course, all the commercial development side of it, tons of money there. So it does feel like a little bit of a bubble potential. I drive around Chattanooga now, and, from clients and friends that are in the development industry and that sort of thing, like it feels like Nashville and Atlanta have started kind of peaking in some area as far as like big opportunity, big return possibilities, and now we're flooding into Chattanooga. One thing that scares the hell out of me is if they do ever put that train from Atlanta to Chattanooga. I think at this point, with autonomous cars increasing all that, they'll probably just forego it. But hell, Alpharetta's only, Atlanta city limits are only 45 minutes from Chattanooga at this point. It's so close.
Yeah, imagine if there was a train and on a weekend, like hundreds of mountain bikers say, "We're going to get on the train and get dropped off," because you can actually ride from downtown Chattanooga to the trails on Lookout Mountain or probably even Raccoon Mountain, and then all of a sudden, there's congestion where there never was before. I don't know. I've certainly got some pretty strong feelings about it. I like it the way it was. I like it the way it is right now. I hope it doesn't get a lot bigger, but it seems like every time I drive anywhere around here, there's a new condo going up, and so I fear that's the direction that we're going. One of my closest friends just got married. I think I've mentioned it earlier in the podcast, right outside Jackson Hole, and so you've got Jackson Hole, which is unique because beautiful place. But there's so much conserved land that you really can't build anything more than what's already there. And so as Jackson Hole has become more Aspenized, I guess, for lack of a better word, it used to be a very affordable, not affordable, it used to be a relatively affordable place to live, and especially for people that were hardcore outdoors folks. But now, you had $1 million homes and you had $10 million homes. Now you have $50 million homes, and and a lot of these people don't even live there most of the time. And so the prices have gone up, and it's driven the baristas and the servers and the school teachers and the nurses and the doctors now out of town. They can't afford to live there. So the next closest town is this little hamlet called Victor, Idaho, and Driggs, Idaho. Two areas that I spend a lot of time in, especially in the winter, because I like to backcountry ski, and there's a lot of it there. One of my very close friends has a home there, and I go out to visit him sometimes in the winter, and we ski together. But the commute is about 45 minutes. And so over the last 5 years, there's been this exodus of people moving because they can't afford to buy a home in Jackson, so they have to buy it in Victor. Well, now the prices in Victor are going up, and they're going up at a rate that, unless you're wealthy,
Yeah.
if you're a school teacher, if you're a plumber, if you're actually, there are a lot of rich plumbers now, but if you're a nurse or, or in the service industry, now you can't live there anymore. You got to go a little further out. There's a little town past that called Teutonia. Now you're an hour and 10 minutes away from Jackson. And, pretty soon we're starting to see housing prices go up there as well. And so, growth does not, Crested Butte would be another great example of where people just got priced out of that and they had to move to Gunnison. Telluride, people can't afford to live there anymore in the service industry. Now they got to go to, Rigby or some of these other, little towns that are close by. So it's just, I feel like it's happening here.
It's, I think the bigger issue I have with all of it, and, the trailhead parking aside, the biggest issue is the discrepancy between the top and the bottom is getting so large. And really it's between the middle class and the upper class. The discrepancy is massive now. And, one example, the house my mom lives in, once my parents, they bought it together and they're still married, and my dad and mom were investing in houses and buying houses. Mm-hmm. And at one point, they were going to buy a whole street in North Chattanooga. This would have been probably early 90s, like 92, something like that. And the whole street was going to cost less than $300,000. We're talking like 15 homes. So North Chattanooga was a lot of shitholes. And the house my mom lives in is still to this day, it's a great little yellow house off of Oliver Street, like the fourth house up on the right from Tremont Street, right there by Fraser Avenue. So
very desirable place to live.
Very desirable. And there's multi-million-dollar homes now. They paid $14,000 for that home back in like 1995. And I remember walking in as a kid. I was 10 years old then and fell through the floor. And it was a duplex at the time. There were two families living in there and fell through the floor. I remember walked in the kids' room in the back, and there's holes in the floor. It's very sad. Sad. But that was right downtown Chattanooga. Now there's multi-million-dollar homes right behind my mom's house, beside it. It's everywhere. But the problem is, like, my mom's getting close to, I think she'll be 80 either this year or next year. Still works at a law firm, still in great health, luckily. But she's a receptionist at a law firm. She doesn't make bukus of money. She makes a good living, But now, in Oliver Street, which is right there by Fraser Avenue, property taxes are going through the roof in Chattanooga. We're experiencing now in Lookout Mountain as well. Like, the property tax I have to pay for my house. And I built it very affordably back 13 years ago. Property tax I'm paying now is more than I paid for rent 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the biggest issue is we're getting forced out of town. Even if you own property and you're a local and you live here, the property taxes from this discrepancy of, the problem I have with it of higher net worth individuals and upper class that see Chattanooga as a resort town, a little getaway from Atlanta or Nashville. And
yeah, it's going in that direction, and I hate it. And, you want to try to maybe fight it, but then you're perceived as sort of anti-progress and, and inevitably things like this just happen. I can't think of a single, Outside Magazine used to write about this because they would get, and I've quit my subscription to Outside Magazine years ago for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that they would always, it's become a little bit more of a well, anyway, it's I don't enjoy it anymore like I used to because of the way they've sort of reported stories, but they would always do this, Best Town Ever issue, of which Chattanooga was a winner 3 years over the last couple of decades. But the minute that they bring attention to some little small beautiful hamlet like Silverton, Colorado, then all of a sudden, like, okay, now all the people are going to be here in 5 years. Thanks a lot, Outside Magazine. You just ruined my favorite little mountain town. And so, fortunately, where you and I live on Lookout, there's limited real estate, right? So there's only so much density that you can have. And one of the goals, if I could use your podcast to plug the Little Lake Land Trust that I'm on the board of directors of, is that we buy land on the back of Lookout, put it in a conservation easement, and then resell it to somebody. So, like, for example, we've got a parcel right now that's about 40 acres So we bought it from a very conservation-minded person. We bought it for a very, very fair price. We'll put a conservation easement, but a 5-acre building envelope so that somebody can buy it, build a home on it, and then the rest of it is in conservation, so it can never be developed. And so we want to sort of see the back of Lookout Mountain to continue to have that level of protection. And we're strategic about where we buy it. We just don't buy anything that comes up. It has to be kind of part of a methodology that we've created. And what we've done over the years is created this corridor where you can actually ride your mountain bike from the Lula Lake core property all the way to Cloudland Canyon on property that we either conserved or own. And so that was a huge thing for people like you and me that like to do things here in the outdoors. I feel like it was sort of a gift to Chattanooga and Lookout Mountain in general, specifically. But yeah, conservation easements sometimes get a bad rap.
Right.
It's a way for wealthy people to buy it and own land and pay minimal taxes and get a tremendous tax benefit. But there's also an upside to it where it can't be developed, and there's a huge positive for that as well.
Yeah, protect wild areas, and it's beautiful. I mean, the areas around like Rock Creek and all those creeks, because you have Rock Creek flows right through them. I guess a lot of the property there, at least the main original property.
Yep.
But that whole corridor between Cloudland Canyon and the front of Lookout, it's gorgeous. Mountain laurels everywhere, beautiful creeks. So it's definitely worth protecting. To see that turn into a bunch of neighborhoods with, subpar, shitty homes built on it, that would be a tragedy, in my opinion.
Yeah, or just a lot of people in general, and traffic, and not having resources like sewage and power and the types of things that it takes to sort of have a community. So
that's happening on Signal Mountain right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Issues with sewer up there. They have a certain limit now to bathrooms. If you renovate a home there, they have to approve it. One of the reasons they're getting denied is if they have an addition of a bathroom and it's on sewer. They're having a real problem up there. But yet, I don't know if you've been up there recently towards the back of Signal. I mean, it's a buddy of mine, 500 acres just got bought by his farm back there. Mm-hmm. And it's an out-of-town company coming in. I think they're proposing, I don't exactly know how many homes, but it's going to be somewhere around 1,500 homes, something like that. And so you look at the, it's 500 acres, so there are going to be more than one on 1 acre tract, but it's not all developable. So let's just say it was 500 homes. You have Roberts Mill Road, which has the first grade is 27, 24%, something like that. Trucks can't go up it when it's wet a lot of times. They don't have four-wheel drive. You have the W Road, which slides quite often. And then you have the front of Signal, which also slides quite often. Those are kind of your three options. And it's, I don't know the last time you've been up Signal Mountain, but it's a traffic jam a lot of times.
Yeah, it's been a minute since I try to avoid that for reasons like that. You never know what you're going to get yourself into.
Yeah.
My wife's a physician here in town, and she works out at the hospital on Gun Barrel Road. And so it's probably, as the crow flies, probably 14, 15 miles. But by the, road, it's probably just under 19. But depending on the time of day, the traffic is nuts. And in the last 5 years, she has to, she pulls up the traffic, on Waze before she comes home every day. She used to never do that. Yeah. So anyway, listen to us, bunch of angry old men complaining about the crowds.
I do think there is a better way of handling things. I don't exactly know what it is. It's a very complex way, but
well, it's interesting. So being in sustainability, I look at the world very differently. So there's sustainability is not just about electric vehicles, but it's also about, hate to pick on you, but that plastic water bottle that you're drinking out of right now, that Fiji water bottle and the water that came from Fiji, the supply chain that it took for that bottle to get here is pretty nuts. I actually read a big article on it one time. And when you look at all the ships and they don't put anything on an airplane, but the ships and the trucks and everything in order for that to get here, because that bottle actually was bottled in Fiji, which is one of the things that they can actually claim, as opposed to Dasani Aquafina that sounds cute but comes out of the tap and is just cleaned up. But there's a lot of decisions that we make as consumers. The way that we commute, the size of the cars that we buy, not being cognizant of we have to have everything right now. Amazon Prime really got us used to next day shipping, and as a society we've just put a lot more burden on the environment just by the nature of the lives that we live now. At Covenant, I tried to outlaw plastic bottles we installed these refillable water stations everywhere, and that it's filtered, cleaner water. And we try to do things to kind of push people to use water bottles instead of going to buy water, or bringing in water bottles of water. But there's a lot of things that we can do as consumers to really do a better job at preserving resources. But I think other countries, they do a lot more with less.
Yeah.
And I think those are lessons that we can do a much better job of here. Not just food, but again, size of the car, size of the roads, the way they've always got a one up on us on public transportation, which is something that would be great if we could have figured out a way to do the trains and things in a way that's better over there. But Chattanooga's made a lot of progress with bike lanes, and although Fraser kind of.
Dude, don't even get me started on that.
But whoever designed that thing should have their degree taken away.
The bike lanes in Chattanooga is not designed by a knowledgeable biker. I mean, I would never use it. Unless I was just piddling around with, Hannah and I on a bike on flip flops. But back when I was a real cyclist, I would never use that, be in the road, because you're not going to be on a road bike. People are really seriously commuting, but I don't want to be all negative on everything. There's a lot of great things about Chattanooga.
I know. But I think as consumers, there's things that we could do a lot better to sort of reduce our consumption, to reduce our impact. There's this, because, conservation and being more intentional about recycling, there's this, my wife and I are designing a house right now. I'm trying to think about a lot of this as it relates to the size of the house that we buy and materials that we buy. But, right now we're working on the kitchen. There's this product, and for those of you listening, you got to go look this up. You ever heard of Mill?
No.
MILL.com, Mill.com. So they make this composting trash can where anything that's organic, you put it in this thing, and at night there's this process that takes place where it's kind of a combination of a grinder and a heating system, but it creates compost, like this dry coffee grain looking material within 24 hours of anything that you put in there. And it you can use it on your garden. You're like, Matt, who has a garden? Fair point. You can put it in a box and ship it back to them, and they pay you for it.
Oh, wow.
So, and then they aggregate it all together and they sell it to people that actually do have gardens, so they're trying to play a role in the circular economy where you're taking things out of what normally would end up in a landfill. You're turning it into something that actually has a positive benefit, if you can actually use it for composting. And yes, there's some supply chains, some shipping back and forth, but what they do with their process is it creates this really dense, nutrient-rich product from stuff that otherwise would have ended up in a landfill. So we're going to put one of these things in our house. And I'm just looking for everything we can do to kind of make it more, I just say sustainable, but that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I'll check that out. Mill.com?
Mill.com.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, in a marketing company like this, this is something, if they decided to engage you guys, you could take them to the next level.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So you got any fun trips? Outdoor trips coming up?
Oh man, always. We never talked about the van, but so I built out a Sprinter van 5 years ago. Local business guy Justin Chip gave me a lot of help and advice. Site 7 camper vans, a little shout out to them. Justin, don't you?
Oh yeah, I know him for a long time.
Justin's one of the most talented people I have ever met with electric and woodworking and welding. He's like the kind of guy that we all want to be like one day. But Justin gave me a lot of advice and help, and I built this thing myself. I still use it pretty much the same way I did when I finished it years ago. So I camp a lot in that, drive a lot out west. I don't have any big van trips planned, but I do take it out to Wyoming every year. I camp here locally in it a lot. Big trips. One of my really good friends who just got married, Clay Watson, and another local guy, Stribling, a big outdoorsman as well. Both of them are incredible fly fishermen, great guys. Clay and Strib and I are going to climb Middle Teton in the beginning of August. Kind of on a 2-day. We're going to do Middle Teton, and we're going to do 2 peaks in 2 days with 1 night in between. We're going to camp on the trail.
Nice.
What else? My wife and I are going to go see my son over in Madrid. He's studying over there for the summer.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, just a lot of hang gliding, a lot of trail running. How about you? You've got anything planned?
Want to do a road trip into this summer. After got one big race coming up in August, and after that, hopefully Hannah and I take the trailer and the GSA out in the trailer, and talking about some last night, but hopefully Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, maybe Colorado, and do like 2 weeks. And she, has to work as well, so maybe fly out, meet me once I'm out there, save her some of the commute time across the country. But I have a buddy just moved to, built a house a little north of Anchorage, Alaska. So it's on my list. I want to ride the motorcycle. So if I have enough time, maybe get out there around Idaho and then find a place to park the trailer and then hop on the GSA and ride all the way up to Alaska.
That is going to take a lot longer than you think it will.
It is a long time. Yeah. It's been on my list to do. It may not happen this year. We'll see. Work's busy, and it's a long trip just to get to Canada border, let alone Canada and Alaska.
I love trips like that. I get to listen to podcasts like this, long form podcasts like Rogan or this one, or in fact, speaking of this podcast, just listen to the one with you and Genesis, great kid. That was fantastic. I think I already mentioned the one with Seth Cathy.
Yeah,
that was great. I'm really glad you're doing this. I mean,
thanks.
There are people in Chattanooga, and there's a little unstructured, but that's cool as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool people in Chattanooga that people don't know about, realize live right. Just some of the people we met last night, they're your friends, at the Up on Lookout, and the stories they're talking about. And there's a lot of great stories to tell here.
Oh, there's great. This buddy of mine, it's now defunct. Luke Schwab had this thing called the People of Chattanooga.
Yeah.
And he would, in fact, at the end of every podcast, he would ask somebody like, hey, I need you to give me 3 names. You can do it right now or you can do it later, of people that would just really be absolutely fascinating to be on the podcast. And anyway, I think he did 20, 30 episodes, but for whatever reason got busy and couldn't do it anymore. But yeah.
I think I was too polarizing politically for the outdoor community to be invited on that one.
I could see that one. What did we talk about? We did talk a lot about a lot of outdoor stuff, but I think you can find that in the internet archives. People of Chattanooga, that was a good one.
Okay.
That's right, because you're like, riding the dirt bike and.
Yeah, and I think at some point maybe he followed me on Instagram, and I was like, I got a feeling I'm going to get invited on here. But I also I was watching people were doing on there. A lot of people I knew and used to climb with and ride with, and some of the political fallout here in the last handful of years wind up on the different side of this table, which I don't like to talk about a ton now anymore. But there for a while, I was pretty opinionated. I mean, I about lost my business and everything because of all of our clients having to shut down. So I was pretty volatile there during COVID, especially, and to hear all these people pushing these agendas and everything else without any concern for what I felt like was reality and consequences that everyday people were having to deal with. Lost some friends still to this day, which is sad. I don't like that. But
I know.
I fell on the opposite side of the table from a lot of those people.
It's funny. I know you don't have kids, but my son is like 18, 19 now, and you feel like you have all this wisdom that you need to be passing down. I'll tell you one thing I failed in doing. I never taught him how to ride a motorcycle. I always wanted to, and I always asked our friend Seth, like, can I bring him out here and teach him how to ride on one of your kind of lesser nice bikes? And he was like, yeah, but I have a $20 drop rule. Like, every time you drop it, it's $20. Nice. He says that just goes into the kitty to repair all the damages that ultimately people do.
Yeah.
So it was fair. But, teach him how to, balance a checkbook and to budget and that sort of thing. But one of them was, you got to be careful what you say publicly. And now, you've got social media platforms, professional like LinkedIn, which is actually turning to be more like X, I've seen. But, then you've got X and Facebook and Instagram and, all the other ones. And, the types of things that you say. And, when you think about, your future and sort of, is it worth it? I used to sort of say a lot of things in the past that I just choose not to say anymore. It doesn't mean I don't feel passionate about it, but it's just not worth, ruining a friendship, ruining a business relationship. And I hate that because some of my favorite people, like our friend Genesis, like we're very different and we're also very alike. Yeah. We can talk about anything. And, we're not going to get mad at each other at the end of the day. And I feel like these long form podcasts are sort of a way to sort of unpack that and also have it. But it's just so I tell him, we're just not going to, you're just better off keeping your opinions at least as, inside your circle as close as you can.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's something that I kind of learned the hard way, but I do sometimes struggle with that because of, I don't want to be I don't want to feel like I'm being forced into being quiet.
Yeah.
That's always like, but there's consequences to everything. And it's a pro-con scenario. You got to weigh out like what's the pro of it and what's the consequence of it, and does it make sense? But
I know. So just as one example, we'll dance around one topic and then that's it.
okay.
So it's funny, when you think about the current administration, and one of the big things that was on, in this last election was what has now become known as the MAHA movement, right? Make America Healthy Again. So here you've got this thing. Like, who in the world could disagree on not having red dye number 5 in their food?
Yeah.
Like, who could be against that? It doesn't matter as far on one side or the other. Like, that is something that we can all get behind.
Yeah.
But even that became political. And it really wasn't, I think Robert Kennedy has a big passion for this. There's some people that have some ideas about what he believes about vaccines, and somehow that invalidates this whole thing, right? But at the end of the day, there are some things that I don't understand why we all just can't get behind, like the environment, like food, like a complete overhaul of the food industry from a regulatory perspective. A few years ago, last year we were in Italy, and I was just walking around like, why are these people skinny? Because they're eating pasta and bread. And, we started doing a little bit of a deep dive and found out that there's only really 3 or 4 ingredients in their bread. And over here, there's 18.
Yeah.
And over here, 12 of those are illegal in those countries. Like, how can that be something that we could disagree about as a society? Let's get rid of those 12 things from our food. But ultimately it is, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's a shame that it's so politicized, because there's some great pieces of that movement. There's 600 allowed ingredients I heard in the UK, and in America over 10,000.
Oh, it's nuts.
How is that possible?
I hope we make some progress there. My wife is a physician, and we talk about this all the time. She goes down these rabbit holes, sort of looking at this and how a lot of really great progress is stopped by their perceived polarization with, well, I don't like that person that's got the microphone, so we're just going to cast this degree of division over anything that comes out of their mouth, just because I don't like the way they feel about this one particular thing, even though the rest of the 90% of what they're saying is something we should all get behind. So anyway, that's as far as we'll go. But yeah.
Well, that's probably a good place for us to stop.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Glad you came in and chatted. I enjoyed learning, especially about the sustainability part.
Yeah.
We're already conquering at least Chattanooga's problems, tackling those for the greater good of Chattanooga.
And you don't, and no editing on these things, right?
No.
All right.
We had one camera turn off. We've been having problems with
this. I keep bumping this light.
We'll edit that out.
Okay.
We had that camera keeps overheating, so I got to figure that part out. We actually had to run. I'll just leave it. We usually just leave this stuff, and it feels more real. I don't like it to feel scripted, but the batteries on these, they tend to overheat. So we shoot them at 4K, allows us to edit a little further, and we can crop in if we need to. But at 4K, it tends to overheat. So now those aren't even batteries. We ran this like aftermarket thing. We're in a wire, and it fills the battery port.
Yep.
Try to cut down on heat.
So podcast available on all platforms. YouTube on the video.
Yep, YouTube, and then Apple, Spotify, and a bunch of other podcasts. Like, it kind of hits an RSS feed and goes out there.
Yep.
But
Good deal.
Share all those with you and put it out there. And
yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. You find me on LinkedIn.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's that on Instagram. Chad the Van. Chad's the name of my van.
And it's
my son named it.
Matt McLelland. And spell your last name for me.
Yeah, McLelland.
I always get it messed up where the 2 L's is.
Or the 2 C. Yeah, people 2 C's. Or there's this other very wealthy family here in Chattanooga that has the same last name but spelled differently. They're McLellan.
Okay.
So, yeah, not related to them.
Gotcha.
Yep. Gotcha. So, great family. They misspelled their name. Ours is spelled right.
Nice.
All right. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
All right. Appreciate it.